Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated economist here. So, I have a few links that I'm going to share with you guys down in the description. One of them is to a YouTube video that I had done probably about 2 years ago. In fact, I think it was 2 years ago, almost to the day. It was May 20th, 2020, I believe, that I put this video out. And like I said, you'll find links down in the description for it. This video is about a half an hour long, and this is really good. It's full of some really good information that predicted a lot of what we saw over the last 2 years. And it wasn't like I was predicting it. I mean, this was information that I was gathering from the Federal Reserve and the economists within the Federal Reserve and their speakings of what they had to say about how they were going to deal with a downturn in the market when the interest rates or the federal funds rate was at the lower bound of zero. So we knew that they were going to run into a problem when they ran into this recession or the pandemic induced recession. A lot of people don't even realize that we had a recession just 2 years ago that was caused by the COVID shutdown. Now, it was a self induced downturn in the market because we locked everything down, told everybody to stay home, started issuing out stimulus checks, all the stuff that came from it, right? So it was self-induced, but it was done in the name of the pandemic. However, I was very much of the impression that we were going to have a downturn in the market anyway. And that is a lot of what Peter Schiff was saying just as the market was starting to turn down during the pandemic. So Peter Schiff was even saying that. I mean, straight up saying that, just because, you have COVID, but you shoot yourself in the foot doesn't mean that you didn't hurt yourself on purpose. You still did it. You just happened to be sick at the time. So I don't know if that's the way Peter said it, but that's the way I'm kind of saying it. Is that, yes, we did have COVID, but then we went and shot ourselves in the foot at both feet. Essentially, both feet and the hands. I mean, it was like, we just screwed ourselves up really bad on deliberately, like it was on purpose. Now, whether it was on purpose to try and create a unusual and exigent circumstance so that we could use the monetary policy tools of the Federal Reserve with like these special purpose vehicles. This is when they, in conjunction with the Treasury, set up an entity that was separated from the Federal Reserve and the Treasury called the Special Purpose Vehicle. They funded that with a bunch of money and then used those special purpose vehicles to facilitate the backstopping of pretty much every corner of the financial market. So if there was a loan to be made, there was a special purpose vehicle out there that was willing to buy that loan. And that's the credible threat that they were putting out there for people to follow. And it worked, totally worked. And this is something that we had talked about in that video prior to the corporate debt lending facility running rampant and all of a sudden just, causing all the corporations out there to gorge on incredibly cheap debt as the investors were out there trying to front run the Federal Reserve, thinking the Federal Reserve was going to be buying up corporate debt, but they never really had to buy corporate debt. All they had to do was to say they were going to be buying corporate debt, and that was enough to get the markets out there and pretty much doing that trade for them. They said it in like a long time ago that it was working. Like even just the establishment of the special purpose vehicle before they even did anything. They didn't even have to purchase anything yet. All they had to do was just establish and say, hey, there's a special purpose vehicle here that could in the future buy corporate debt. That was enough to get people buying corporate debt. So it was credible threats that really did it. And if you go and you look at like the Ben Bernanke speech that is linked into that video, like if you go and watch that video, look at all the links that are in there. There's a ton of information that I left for you to follow, and you can see right there and all this stuff dating prior to the pandemic of what they were planning on doing during the next downturn, and it was exactly what occurred. I mean, just because it happened to be the pandemic that did it and they were able to use these tools, it doesn't matter. It was the pandemic that gave them the unusual and exigent circumstance in order to use these tools. So if they didn't have the pandemic, we just had the downturn, like, okay, there is no sickness, there is no war, there is nothing going on, but yet we have this economic downturn, they would never have been able to establish those special purpose vehicles. And that is a critical thing to think about because nobody seems to talk about these things anymore. It's like that is like old news, gone out of here. But it was very critical to the functioning of the markets at the time because it gave them the confidence they needed to go out there and start providing the funding to everything out there. Like everything. Houses, cars, credit cards, corporations, everybody started getting the markets involvement in it because they felt that the Federal Reserve was going to be in there printing up money and buying into this stuff. But all they had to do was to say they were. Now, they bought some. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some of these special purpose vehicles were well used, like the payroll protection program. There was some of these things that were like, well used, like completely used. But then other ones were not at all, and they were very much just the credible threat alone that did it. So, where's this little dog? Oh, it must be their dog. Okay, sorry, there's a little puppy running across here, but I just realized it's their dog. Okay, so moving on, guys. That's probably going to be weird for the podcast. Okay, so anyway, so this is what they had established prior to the pandemic really kicking in, is that they had all this idea of what they were going to use during this downturn, and it was well established. Now, if you go and you look at some of these statements that are coming from the Federal Reserve now, because we have this inflation that is running extra hot for extra long for this extended period of time, like they said that they were going to do, that everybody says that they've lost control over, which I just don't see that taking place, considering that they said that they were going to do this exact thing, right? They were going to make sure that inflation expectation was well anchored above the 2% target mark, and man, did they get it. They have that inflation expectation running very hot right now. So now it's time for them to turn it off, and it's going to be very difficult, because once you have inflation expectation running, now it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you are anticipating inflation, then you're going to behave as if inflation is going to come, and if you behave as if inflation is going to come, then you're going to cause inflation, because you're going to go out there and you're going to pay extra or higher price for something in anticipation that if you don't buy it now, then the price is going to go up. Or you might buy more of what you need because you're anticipating that the price is going to go up, or it just won't be available. All these things are self-fulfilling prophecies that cause the inflation to continue to move on upward. So the Federal Reserve is going to try and do something that is going to stop that from happening, and you can see it happening. They're like talking about all the massive uncertainty. It just says it over and over again. In fact, I'm going to leave a link to an interview with an economist, and I believe it was in the first 40 seconds that they talked to this guy. He said uncertainty 3 times. So it's like they're putting out this narrative of uncertainty. We don't know, we're not sure, right? And then if they can put out this, I don't know if we're going to continue with a 1/4 point interest, a 1/2 point interest, a 1 point interest rate on the Fed funds. Are we going to take it to 3% or 8% or 6%? We don't know. There's so much uncertainty out there, right? So we can't predict exactly where it is we're going to go. We just know we need to do something about it, and it's going to be very hot. So they took the 3/4 point interest rate off the table. It's like, oh, we're not going to raise it 3/4 of a point. That's going to be just far too much. We'll only maybe do a 1/2 point interest rate, but there's so much uncertainty out there, we really just don't know. So now, what is it that they're going to be raising the interest rates to? The Fed funds level, right? This is the one that if you're not familiar with the Fed funds level, it's basically a target rate for the big banks interlending. That's like the basis of like all lending after that. So the easiest way to explain it is that at the end of the day, some banks are in need of reserves, some of them are in excess reserves. The one who have excess reserves lend it to the ones who are in need of reserves. This overnight lending rate is the effective fund rate. So whatever that rate is like the basis of all lending after that. So when these big banks lend to each other, that is like the basis that starts lending. After that, most interest rates are going to be more than what the big banks lend to each other on. Does that kind of make sense? There's a lot of change to that. There's not exactly that scenario happening in the same. A lot of it is now moved over to the standing repo facility, where the Federal Reserve will buy and sell treasuries off of these big banks in order to establish where their reserve levels are as far as cash and treasuries and stuff. That gets really complicated, but just kind of think about like the Fed funds rate as a target rate, and what that is for the big banks interlending to each other, and the basis of where all loans go from there, or the interest rate from loans go from there. So that's really what the Federal Reserve is shooting for, is for that Fed funds rate to be at a neutral rate. Like, they don't want to be accommodating nor restricting the economy. They want to be neutral. But they think that they need to be a little bit above neutral in order to bring down this inflation, right? Because the price inflation is just running so hot. Okay, now go and look at what the Federal Reserve, what is it, Kakashi. I can't remember his name. I'm sorry, guys. Anyway, he had a blog statement, and I'll leave a link down in the description for that. He wrote a blog in his blog the other day, talking about establishing the credibility from the Federal Reserve, right? And that when it comes time to raising interest rates or unwinding the balance sheet, what they have already stated they have done that they're going to do, like the 0.5 point interest rate, the unwinding of the balance sheet, these things, the statements that they have said that they are going to do going into the future, they're going to do that. The statements that they said they may do going beyond that, that is just a credible threat. That is not actually something that they are planning on doing. They are just something that they want the markets to believe that they plan on doing. But the things that they have done, like as far as telling the markets ahead of time the forward guidance that they have already given, that part they're probably going to go ahead and establish that position. They are going to meet that credible threat so that they can keep that credibility. Does that make sense? So like they say that they're going to take interest rates to like 2%, right? Most likely they'll get it to 2%. But once they start encroaching on that 2%, the lingo that they use after that will most likely be very vague, saying that we may or may not go beyond this 2%. We're going to be data dependent. We'll have to be like, whatever. They're going to make up a bunch of stuff that says that we are not going to be quite sure of what it is that we're going to do beyond this point, right? But at that point right there is probably where they're reaching neutral. But we don't know what neutral is. They don't know what neutral is. We know that here in the Western economies that neutral was 2.5%, but a lot of people are saying that's moved down to like the 0 to 1.5% mark. So we very well could be right at neutral or encroaching on neutral very quickly, as even with the next interest rate hike. However, in order to tame the inflation, they're going to go above that. But look at what he says in that blog. He talks over and over and over again about supply chain, about how the China lockdowns, the Ukraine, all that stuff, the supply chains are what's going to be the major issue as far as being able to bring the inflation back down. See, it's not monetary policy. I keep saying that over and over again. It's the supply chain. It's the supply chain that is broken down that is causing the price inflation to be as high as it is. It doesn't allow for honest pricing to be found. And this is where like there's so much obscurity taking place. It is very difficult to try and predict what it is that the future is going to look like, because things are changing very quickly. I mean, just look at the interest rates on mortgages. I mean, they were up at like close to 7% just a week and a half ago, 2 weeks. I mean, I think they're down to around 6 right now. But the markets are going crazy. They're dumping out 1,000 points on the Dow at times, and the amount of like uncertainty, which is a great word that I'm just gonna laugh every time I hear it from now on, within like all the nations around the world, like all the sovereign debts, all the offshore corporate debt bonds that are out there. And what I mean by that is like there is a lot of US dollars that are due from these foreign nations, these foreign corporations. They took out debt and they used US dollars to do it. That debt is due in US dollars. The Federal Reserve is pulling those dollars out of the system. That is going to make it very difficult on nations and corporations all around the world. If this continues, it is going to be very, very painful. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. Uneducated economists, go check out those links. Go check out that video I did. Very, very good video. It's about a half an hour long, but it is full of some really good stuff. Let's see what else I want to say. Check out the podcast. I'm putting links on I'm going back and finding some of these old videos. That's where I found that video. I was looking for more stuff to put on the podcast, and so I found that video. It's on the podcast. Please go check it out. There you can listen to all these videos there. I upload them, or actually my friend Chandler, she helps me out with the channel. She's the one who uploads the videos to or the audios up to the podcast. But I'm trying to push that a little bit more and get that up and moving. So, Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.